The No Sports Center we go over a college football game preview and prediction on the 2022 Holiday Bowl matchup between the Oregon Ducks and the North Carolina Tar Heels. Both teams have had good seasons getting to this point. Oregon, one of the top teams in the Pac-12 this season. They finished out the regular season at 9-3. They're taking on North Carolina, the runner-up in the ACC this season. Should make for a good matchup. We'll be over a full game preview and prediction on this matchup here today, starting with your team trends. Oregon lost to Oregon State 34-38 was the final score there, and that was a brutal way to finish out the regular season. Oregon State was down for a long time. Looked as if the Ducks were going to cruise to a win there, but Oregon State stormed back into it and stole the win off of Oregon. The Ducks finish out the regular season at 9-3. As for North Carolina, they lost to Clemson in the ACC Championship 10-39. Clemson really had a strong game there, and they ended up beating North Carolina pretty considerably, but still a good season for North Carolina, getting up to 9-4. This team was 9-1 heading into the middle parts of November, and so that was a tough way to finish out the regular season with 3 straight losses, but at least North Carolina still got a chance to get their 10th win in this matchup. Games to be on Wednesday, December 20th in San Diego, California, and your kickoff is 8 p.m. Eastern. Spread's going with Oregon here by 14.5. I think Oregon is the biggest favorite out of any team in any bowl game this bowl season. The Ducks are favored by 2 touchdowns, which might surprise you at first, but once you look in depth on both teams, and you'll see North Carolina, how they've played down the stretch, plus they don't have a couple of their key players, it makes sense why Oregon is such a heavy favorite in this matchup. Over-under is 74, so this is expected to be a potential shootout as well, which also makes perfect sense considering both defenses have been poor this season, while both offenses have been generally really good. And the FPI is also going with Oregon here, 69.7%. This is the first matchup between Oregon and North Carolina in both programs' histories. Stat comparison for this one, Oregon is 12th in points per game. They're averaging 40 points a game, which is actually super impressive. You got Bo Nix, who's had an outstanding season at quarterback, over 3,300 yards, 27 touchdowns, over 6 picks. After that rough start against Georgia in week 1, it seemed, some fans weren't quite on board with Bo Nix yet, but he really proved himself down the stretch, and Bo Nix has been generally really good this season. He's definitely his best season to date. Of course, he was an Auburn transfer quarterback, and he had some success with Auburn, but this has by far been his best season in his college career to this point. And the Ducks are 78th in points allowed, 16th in passers game, 14th in rush yards. So once again, a strong offense here in the Ducks. Defensively, not too good in the pass defense. They're 117th in pass yards allowed, 30th in rush yards allowed. As for North Carolina, they're 23rd in points per game. They're averaging 35 points a game. They're 106th in points allowed, though, which is worse than Oregon. If you look at North Carolina, they're allowing an average of 31 points a game. Oregon is allowing an average of 27. Yeah, for North Carolina, defensively, got to be better, and we saw that. That Clemson game, offensively, they couldn't really get much going against Clemson either way, but it's tough to allow 39 points to Clemson and expect to win a football game, especially when it's as high of a stage as it was in the ACC Championship. But North Carolina, a strong passing team. They're 8th in pass yards a game. They're 73rd in rush yards, and then for yards allowed, they're 115th in passing, 87th in rushing. So the main way that North Carolina is able to put up points is through the passing game with Drake May, who's actually had a great season. He's definitely had an impressive season, over 4,100 yards, 35 touchdowns to 7 picks. He's returning for next season as well, which is going to be huge for North Carolina, and potentially the Tar Heels are an ACC dark horse going into next season. That could definitely be a possibility. He kind of reminds me of Sam Howell in a way, back when he was young in his career with North Carolina. He was really impressive, and Drake May has kind of reminded me of him. But Drake May is also the lead rusher on this team with over 600 yards and 7 touchdowns. He's had a huge impact on this team this season. So, something to keep in mind. Both teams are not too good in passing defense. So, there's a good chance that we see this game become a high-scoring one, and wouldn't be surprised one bit if this game was a track meet. Recent matchups, Oregon, they lost Oregon State 34-38. They beat Utah 20-17. So they finally beat Utah. That was the one team that they couldn't beat last season. But they did lose to Washington and Oregon State both in the process in the last 3 games. Now that Washington loss especially was tough, 34-37. being the final score. Colorado beat them 49-10, also beat Cal 42-24. As for North Carolina, they lost to Clemson 10-39. They lost NC State in double overtime, lost to Georgia Tech by 4. That Georgia Tech loss in particular was definitely a shocking one. When you got a North Carolina team that was 9-1 heading into that matchup, I mean, they were looking like a potential dark horse New Year's Six contender. I don't know about a college football playoff contender, but I mean, they were very much in a really good spot. And to lose to Georgia Tech in the way that they did definitely was brutal, and really haven't been the same ever since. I mean, that double overtime loss to NC State was brutal, and they just fell flat in that game against Clemson. But otherwise, they beat Wake Forest before their slump started, beating Wake Forest 36-34. Also beat Virginia 31-28. Key points for this one, Oregon 9-3 offensively. They've got depth. They're a very talented team, and they're tough to stop. When they get going, it's brutal to stop the Ducks. Bo Nix playing at a high level, 3,300 yards. I mean, 27 touchdowns, 6 picks. Once again, really good stats out of him, and this has been his best season so far. And, I mean, Bo Nix, Drake May, both quarterbacks for both teams here have had great seasons, and both quarterbacks are returning for the 2023 season. So you can expect Oregon and North Carolina to potentially be dark horse contenders going into next season. You're going to be hearing a lot out of both these teams this offseason. But yeah, Bo Nix having the best season of his career defensively. Oregon has had a few issues down the stretch. That is a bit of a concern. I mean, allowing Oregon State to storm right back into that game to finish out the regular season. I mean, also allowing 37 points to Washington. I mean, they've been impressive at points as well, but I mean, the defense could definitely be more consistent. As for North Carolina, 9-4. I mean, this team was 9-1, lost their past 3 games. Defensively, got to be strong here. That's going to be a key factor for North Carolina, and that's a big reason why the Tar Heels are such an underdog in this game. Is offensively, it's going to be tougher for this team because they don't have Josh Downs, their top receiver this season, who's caught over 1,000 yards and 11 touchdowns. He's had a huge impact on this team, and he's not going to be in this game. So for Drake May, not having his top receiver, that could definitely be a concern. And I mean, this is especially a game where both teams are going to be throwing the ball quite a bit, I can imagine, considering both past defenses have been fairly poor this season. So that is a key factor here. I think that definitely plays into why Oregon is such a heavy favorite here. But I do think North Carolina they're going to be able to put up points. It's just a matter of whether or not they can keep up with Oregon. Yeah, Drake May, he's North Carolina's next great quarterback, and he's got a bright future. I mean, honestly, both quarterbacks here between Bo Nix and Drake May. I know that Bo Nix, he's got much more experience than Drake May does. But, I mean, both quarterbacks I do think have got bright futures, and it's really a great thing to see Bo Nix have the success that he's having. I mean, we remember at Auburn, I mean, he was a good quarterback at Auburn, but he just never really reached his full potential, it seemed, and transferring to Oregon seemed to be exactly what he needed. But that said, let's get to the prediction here for Oregon and North Carolina coming up here in the Holiday Bowl. This one could be a shootout, and that's kind of what I'm expecting. I'm going to be going with Oregon 41-24 is my predicted final score. So I've actually got the Ducks covering the spread here. And this one, it's tough. I honestly, I wanted to take North Carolina to cover the spread, but the more I thought about it, with North Carolina, I mean, down the stretch, it's been tough for them to score anywhere. I mean, if you look at their past few games, they haven't scored more than 30 since early to mid-November. And so, I mean, considering that for North Carolina, and now you don't have your top receiver in there, Josh Downs is declared for the NFL draft, it's going to be tougher for North Carolina to score points here. I do think they put up 24-30 or so, but in the end, the Ducks offense gets it done. They score 41. I could see them scoring potentially more, upwards of 50 on this North Carolina defense. But in the end, I do want to go with Oregon to win this one 41-24. I'll say 60% towards the Ducks, over under 74. I do think that line there at 74 is a bit high. So I'm going to be taking the under for this one, and we're going to cover the spread in the end. But honestly, if you think North Carolina's going to win, might as well just take the over, because I can imagine the Ducks are going to score a lot of points here, and for North Carolina to win, they're going to have to score a lot as well. So I wouldn't be surprised one bit if it went over in that case, but I'm going Ducks here in the end. Let me know your thoughts in the comments below on this matchup, and I appreciate you guys watching as always. Stay tuned for more from All Sports Central. Catch you on the next one.